Montana Territory, 1875. The horizon swallowed the sun in a blaze of crimson and gold as Dawson Lawson guided his exhausted sorrel across the windswept prairie. At 25, he'd already lived more lifetimes than most men twice his age, fought in skirmishes with hostile tribes, driven cattle through blizzards, and buried more friends than he cared to remember. The hard lines etched around his blue eyes belied his youth, though his strong jawline, tousled brown hair, and athletic frame still marked him as a young man. "Just you and me, boy," he murmured to his horse, patting its sweat-slicked neck. "Always has been, always will be." Dawson had learned early that attachments were dangerous in this untamed wilderness. His father had loved his mother fiercely, only to waste away from grief when she died of fever. Dawson was 16 when he buried his father, and he'd vowed never to give anyone that kind of power over him. The frontier was for the self-reliant. Love was a luxury that got men killed. The approaching thunderheads worried him as he surveyed the barren landscape. His canteen was nearly empty, and the nearest town was still 2 days' ride. He needed shelter before the storm hit. As if in answer, he spotted it. An abandoned wagon tilted awkwardly in a shallow ravine about a half-mile ahead. Dawson approached cautiously, Winchester ready. Abandoned wagons often meant death, and sometimes ambush. The wagon was newer than he expected, its canvas torn but still partially intact. No sign of bodies or struggle, just the broken wheel that had likely caused its abandonment. He dismounted, leading his horse closer to investigate. That's when he heard it, the most beautiful sound he'd ever encountered. It was singing, soft and clear as mountain water. A woman's voice, floating from inside the wagon, singing a lullaby he hadn't heard since his mother sang it to him as a child. The melody wrapped around him like an embrace, stopping him in his tracks. "Hello," he called, his hand still hovering near his colt. The singing stopped abruptly. After a moment's silence, the canvas flap moved, and a young woman emerged, a small pistol pointed unwaveringly at his chest. "That's close enough, mister," she said. Dawson raised his hand slowly. "I mean no harm, ma'am. Just looking for shelter before the storm hits." She studied him with intelligent green eyes. She couldn't have been more than 22, with golden hair tied back in a practical braid. Her blue calico dress was travel-worn but clean, and despite her precarious situation, she carried herself with dignity. "You alone?" she asked, her voice steady. "Yes, ma'am." A wail rose from inside the wagon, and her composure faltered momentarily. "A baby's cry. I've got beans and coffee," Dawson offered. "And I can help with that will come morning." The woman hesitated, glancing back at the wagon where the crying continued. Thunder rumbled in the distance. She lowered her pistol slightly. "Grace Lawton," she said finally. "And my son, Thomas." "Dawson Lawson," he replied, wondering at the coincidence of their similar surnames. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Grace." As rain began to fall, Grace reluctantly allowed Dawson to make camp beneath the wagon's partial shelter. She watched him warily as he built a small fire and prepared a meager supper, her 6-month-old son cradled protectively in her arms. "Your husband?" Dawson asked carefully, noting the absence of a wedding ring. "Dead," she answered flatly. "Fever took him 3 months back. We were heading to my sister's in Helena when the wheel broke yesterday." Her chin lifted. "I can manage on my own." Dawson nodded, recognizing the fierce independence mirroring his own. "I don't doubt it, ma'am." As they ate, the storm intensified. Grace sang softly to quiet her fussing child, and despite his resolve, Dawson found himself drawn to her voice, to the tenderness she showed her son, a vulnerability that somehow seemed like strength out here where everything was harsh and unforgiving. "You've got a gift," he said when she finished. "That's singing." "My mother taught me," she replied, a smile briefly softening her features. "Said a song could calm the wildest heart." She glanced down at her sleeping child. "Seems to work on him, at least." That night, as rain drummed against the canvas, Dawson lay awake, troubled by unfamiliar feelings. Something about this woman and her child made his carefully constructed solitude feel suddenly hollow. Morning brought clearing skies and a new dilemma. The wagon wheel wasn't simply broken, the axle was cracked as well. It would need more than field repairs. "There's a settlement about 15 miles south," Dawson said after his assessment. "I can't fix this here, but I could take you there." Grace looked from her sleeping child to the broken wagon containing everything she owned. "We can't leave the wagon," she said. "It's all I have left. Then I'll go get help and come back." She studied him skeptically. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." The question caught him off guard. Why indeed? His instincts screamed to move on, to not get entangled in this woman's troubles. But the memory of her voice, the innocent trust of her sleeping child, they had somehow breached his defenses. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. Dawson rode hard, returning late that afternoon with a borrowed wagon and a grizzled blacksmith named Emmett. While they worked to salvage Grace's belongings, Dawson noticed a cluster of weathered crosses on a nearby hilltop. "What happened there?" he asked Emmett quietly. "Cholera took a wagon train 2 years back," the old man replied. "Lost 17 souls in 3 days." Dawson glanced at Grace, cradling her son while directing which items to save. The frontier was merciless to those who traveled alone, especially women and children. His chest tightened at the thought. As they prepared to depart for the settlement, Grace approached him. "I can't pay you," she said directly. "Not yet, but I will, once I reach my sisters." "No need," Dawson replied. "I'm headed north myself. Helena's on my way." It wasn't. He'd been traveling west to Wyoming. The lie surprised him as much as her. The small settlement of Cottonwood Creek consisted of a general store, blacksmith, saloon, and scattered cabins. The locals eyed them curiously as they arrived, Grace and Thomas in the borrowed wagon, Dawson riding alongside. "You can stay with my wife and me," Emmett offered Grace. "Got a spare room since our daughter married." That evening, Dawson sat alone on the porch of the town's small boarding house, contemplating his inexplicable decision to escort Grace to Helena, a good 4 days' journey. He'd avoided attachments for 8 years. Why risk it now? The door creaked open behind him, and Grace stepped out, moonlight silvering her golden hair. "Thomas is finally asleep," she said, settling beside him on the step. "I wanted to thank you properly." "It's nothing." "It's not nothing, Mr. Lawson. Not out here." They sat in silence for a moment, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them. "That song you were singing," Dawson said finally. "My mother used to sing it." Grace smiled. "It's an old one. My grandmother brought it from Scotland. My father met my mother in St. Louis. She was a singer at a riverboat hall. He always said her voice was what made him stay west instead of heading back east." "And where are they now?" she asked gently. "Gone. Mother first. Then father couldn't bear it and drank himself to death." Grace was quiet for a long moment. "My Thomas, my husband, he knew he was dying. Made me promise to keep singing. Said our boy would need beautiful things in this hard world." Her voice broke slightly. "Some days I wonder if I was a fool to come west at all." "The frontier breaks most who come," Dawson said. "But not you." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition of a shared resilience, of wounds still healing. The journey to Helena began 2 days later, with Grace's wagon repaired and loaded. Dawson rode ahead as scout, his senses alert for danger, while Grace followed with Thomas and their provisions. On the 3rd night, as they camped beside a creek, Grace joined Dawson by the fire after putting Thomas to sleep in the wagon. "Why did you really decide to help us?" she asked. "Truth this time." Dawson stared into the flames. "Your voice," he admitted. "When I heard you singing, it reminded me there's still beauty in this world." "Beauty doesn't last out here," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. "But maybe that's why it matters when you find it." Their conversation was interrupted by distant wolf howls. Grace shivered. "I should check on Thomas," she said, rising quickly. That night, Dawson dreamed of his mother's funeral, but when he approached the grave, it was Grace lying there, silent and still. He woke with a start, cold sweat on his brow. The old fear gripped him. Caring meant inevitable loss. The next day, they encountered a family heading west, their wagon overloaded, children thin and tired. The father, Nathan Cooper, explained they were bound for Oregon. "Indians hit our last camp," Cooper said quietly to Dawson. "Lost our hunting rifle and medicine chest." Grace overheard. Without hesitation, she retrieved a small box of medical supplies from her wagon. "Take these," she insisted, pressing them into Mrs. Cooper's hands. "And this." She added a jar of preserved fruit. "For the children." Dawson watched, conflicted. Her generosity was dangerous. They couldn't spare much themselves. "Why did you do that?" he asked when the family moved on. "Because I've been hungry and afraid," she answered simply. And because someone once helped me when I needed it. That evening, when they made camp, Grace sang to Thomas as usual. But this time, Dawson found himself drawing closer, watching as she rocked her son. When she finished, she looked up, catching him. Would you like to hold him? She asked. Dawson hesitated. I don't know how. It's simple enough, she said, standing and carefully transferring the drowsy infant to his arms. The weight of the child surprised him. So small, yet substantial. Thomas blinked up at him with curious eyes, his tiny hand wrapping around Dawson's finger with surprising strength. He likes you, Grace observed. Something shifted in Dawson's chest, a loosening of a knot he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. The next morning, disaster struck. A rattlesnake spooked Grace's horses, sending the wagon careening off the trail. Dawson watched in horror as it tilted precariously near a steep embankment, Grace clutching Thomas as she fought for control. He spurred his horse forward, reaching the team just as the wagon teetered on the edge. Leaping from his saddle, he grabbed the lead horse's bridle, using all his strength to pull them back from the drop. The wagon stabilized, but the rear wheel had shattered on a rock. Are you hurt? He asked, his heart pounding as he helped Grace down. She shook her head, pale but composed, Thomas wailing against her shoulder. We're all right. But they weren't all right. The wagon was damaged beyond their ability to repair in the field, and they were still a day's ride from Helena. We'll have to leave most of it, Dawson said after assessing the damage. Take what you can carry on my horse. We'll walk the rest of the way. Grace surveyed the wagon, all that remained of her previous life. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded resolutely. Thomas and I have each other. The rest is just things. They salvaged what they could, loading essentials onto Dawson's horse. As Grace secured the last bundle, a movement on the ridge caught Dawson's eye. Riders, at least 4 of them, moving fast. Get down, he ordered, drawing his Winchester. Behind the wagon. Now. The riders approached rapidly, rough-looking men, heavily armed. Their leader, a bearded man with a scar crossing his left cheek, reined in 20 yards away. Well now, he called. Looks like you folks are having some trouble. We're managing, Dawson replied evenly, rifle ready. Maybe we can help, the man suggested with a predatory smile. For a price. His eyes moved to Grace, who stood protectively shielding Thomas. We don't need help, Dawson said. Move along. The leader laughed. For guns say otherwise, boy. Tension crackled like lightning. Dawson knew the odds, 4 against 1, with Grace and Thomas caught in the middle. Fighting meant certain death. Take what supplies you want and go, he offered, careful to keep his voice steady. Oh, we will, the leader assured him. But the lady comes too. Pretty thing like her would fetch a good price across the border. Cold fury rose in Dawson's chest. That's not happening. The leader sighed theatrically. Brave, but stupid. He nodded to his men. Kill him. Take the woman and whatever else looks valuable. What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. As the bandits reached for their weapons, a shot cracked from behind Dawson. The leader's shoulder erupted in blood, toppling him from his saddle. Grace stood with her small pistol extended, face set in grim determination. The momentary confusion gave Dawson his chance. He fired twice, dropping another rider, then dove for cover as bullets splintered the wagon beside him. Grace retreated with Thomas, sheltering behind a boulder. The remaining 2 bandits split up, trying to flank them. Dawson caught one with his next shot, but the last man circled behind, approaching Grace's position. Dawson, she screamed in warning. He spun, seeing the bandit taking aim at Grace. In that instant, everything crystallized, the truth he'd been running from. He couldn't lose her. Not Grace. Not her song. He lunged from cover, exposing himself to fire a desperate shot. The bandit fell, but not before his bullet found its mark. Pain blazed through Dawson's side as he collapsed. Grace was beside him instantly, pressing her shawl against the wound. Don't you dare die, she commanded, tears streaming down her face. Don't you dare. Sing, he whispered through clenched teeth. Please. And she did, her voice trembling but clear, the same lullaby he'd first heard from the abandoned wagon. Thomas joined his mother's tears, but Dawson focused only on her voice as darkness crept in from the edges of his vision. He woke to unfamiliar surroundings, a clean bed, white curtains, the smell of medicine. A doctor's house in Helena, he learned later. Grace had managed to flag down a passing stagecoach, and they'd brought him to town. The bullet had missed his vital organs. He would recover. Grace visited daily, Thomas growing more animated with each visit. She had found her sister, who owned a small dressmaking shop in town. "I've been thinking," she said on his 5th day of recovery, "about what you said about beauty not lasting on the frontier." "I was wrong," Dawson replied. "It does last. In memories. In songs." He paused. "In the way you look at your son." She took his hand. "In the way you risked everything for us." When Dawson was strong enough to leave the doctor's care, Grace's sister offered him lodging in their spare room until he fully recovered. Days turned to weeks, and Dawson found himself helping in the small garden, repairing the roof, building a cradle for Thomas. Each evening, Grace would sing, and sometimes, hesitantly, Dawson would join her. One evening, as summer faded toward autumn, Dawson sat with Grace on her sister's porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "I received a letter today," Grace said, "from the land office in Oregon. Thomas, my husband, he filed a claim before he died. 80 acres near the Columbia River. It's mine if I want it." Dawson felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "Oregon's good country," he managed. "Fertile." "Too far to travel alone with a small child?" she continued. "Unless." She turned to face him. "Unless I had a partner." "Grace, I know what you fear," she said. "I've seen it in your eyes since that first day. You're afraid to lose what you love, so you've decided not to love at all." "It's not that simple." "It is," she insisted. "Life is brief and hard out here. We both know that. But living in fear of loss isn't living at all." Thomas began to cry from inside, and Grace rose to tend to him. Dawson remained on the porch, her words echoing in his mind. That night, he walked the streets of Helena until dawn, wrestling with the truth she'd laid bare. The next morning, he found Grace in the garden, Thomas sleeping in a basket beside her as she gathered vegetables. "I watched my father die of grief," Dawson said without preamble. "I swore I'd never make myself that vulnerable. But then I heard you singing in that abandoned wagon, and something inside me recognized what I'd been missing." Grace straightened, waiting. "I've been surviving, not living," he continued. "And I'm tired of it." He took a deep breath. "I don't know if I can be the man you and Thomas deserve. I'm still afraid. But if you're willing to risk Oregon together, I'd like to try." Grace's smile was like sunrise. "I'm afraid too," she admitted. "Every day? But being afraid together seems better than being afraid alone." 2 weeks later, they were married in Helena's small church. Dawson sold his horse to buy Grace a simple gold ring, and she wore wildflowers in her hair. Her sister made a new dress of pale blue cotton, and Thomas, dressed in his best, was passed among the small gathering of well-wishers. That winter, they remained in Helena, saving and planning for the journey to Oregon in spring. Dawson found work with a local rancher, while Grace helped in her sister's shop. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, Thomas sleeping between them, and talk of the future, the house they would build, the crops they would plant, the life they would make together. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked one night. "Helping a woman and child with a broken-down wagon?" Dawson pulled her close. "Only that I almost rode past. I nearly missed the most beautiful sound I've ever heard." In April of 1876, they set out for Oregon in a sturdy new wagon with strong horses and careful preparations. The journey would be long and not without danger, but as they crested the first hill outside Helena, Dawson felt none of the old restlessness, none of the familiar urge to remain unattached and free. Instead, with Grace beside him and Thomas babbling happily on her lap, he felt something he had never expected to find on the frontier, the certainty of home, carried not in timber and nails, but in the bonds between them. "Sing for us," he asked as the road unfurled before them. And as Grace's voice rose clear and strong in the morning air, Dawson realized that the frontier hadn't made him hard after all. It had simply been waiting to teach him that true strength lay in daring to love despite all its dangers. In the years that followed, their homestead on the Columbia grew and prospered. Thomas was joined by 2 sisters, and visitors often remarked on the unusual harmony of their home, how the hardships that broke so many settlers seemed to strengthen the Lawsons instead. On summer evenings, neighbors would sometimes gather to hear Grace sing, her voice carrying across fields ripe with wheat and orchards heavy with fruit. And beside her always, Dawson would listen with wonder, Grateful beyond words for the day, he found an abandoned wagon and the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard.